Jim Clyburn is the only Democratic congressman representing the state of South Carolina. He's also the first black person to represent the state in Congress since the end of Reconstruction. He has held his seat in majority black district for 33 years, many of which he spent in positions of party leadership. This year, though, as we all know, Donald Trump, with an assist from the conservative majority of the Supreme Court, demanded Republicans nationwide, in an unprecedented move that has never really happened at this scale, suddenly, in the middle of the decade, redraw their congressional maps explicitly to get rid of Democrats and to remove majority black districts, one and the same in states like South Carolina. That was the plan, to essentially eliminate black representation through the South because those districts tend to elect Democrats. And it seemed all but certain that Clyburn's seat would be essentially redrawn and Clyburn's position eliminated. And then something pretty rare happened. State Republicans found some kind of backbone. Yesterday, the state legislators in South Carolina just refused. They voted against it. They voted down an effort to redraw their maps before the deadline expired. Now, the state might still try again before 2028, but for now, Congressman Clyburn will almost certainly be returning to Congress for his 18th term. And Congressman Jim Clyburn joins me now. Congressman, it's wonderful to have you here. I was thinking about you, obviously, as we all followed these developments. I mean, first of all, just your reaction to it. Were you surprised? Did you have advanced notice? Did you have conversations that led you to believe the outcome yesterday was what was going to happen?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Chris. No, I was not surprised at all. I was a little bit disappointed at some of the processes that took place, but the result I expected. And the reason I expected that is because there are two things about South Carolinians that those of us who live among them understand. There's a pretty broad independent streak that runs through South Carolinians, and they don't like people telling them what they must do. But secondly, they have some real principles, South Carolinians do, about the Constitution, about our democracy. They may not interpret it the same way that I will, but they do believe in fundamental fairness. And if you listen to the speeches that the Republicans made on this subject, they kept talking about people have already started voting. Mm-hmm. 2 weeks ago, people from overseas were casting their votes. And then on yesterday, before they ever convened, over 20,000 people voted on yesterday morning, ended the evening with 56,000 people having voted. And on today, another 30,000 voted by 4 o'clock this afternoon. So people are engaged in this process. They don't want to have their votes thrown out. And these senators did not want to be put in that kind of a situation.
I think it's fair to say that you are, sir, an institution in South Carolina politics, and not just, I would add, in Democratic politics, but in the politics of the state across both parties. Were you involved in conversations? Were you having phone calls face to face? Were you talking to members of the state legislature, talking to the governor, talking to other members of the congressional delegation about this attempt and making your case for why it would be a mistake?
I never spoke to the governor on this subject at all. I did speak with several of the legislators a week or so ago when they were debating the issue in the House. And, of course, the House passed it, as we expected that they would. And I did talk with some African-American senators and some Democrats a couple of days before they started voting. And on today, I've spoken with several senators afterwards, including several of the Republicans. So I understand exactly what the machinations were, and I expected the result to be what it has been. And I do expect that we'll be revisiting this after the primary election on June 9th.
There are other states that have made noises about doing something similar. Alabama has moved forward and were just blocked by a federal appeals court. Louisiana is moving forward with a new map. There's talk in Mississippi. Mississippi is a similar state to South Carolina. Both those states have some of the highest African-American populations in the entire country. Both of them only have a single district represented by a Democrat, and that district is majority minority. Do you think that what happened in South Carolina will have carryover effects to some of those other states?
I think so. I think that those fundamental principles that ought to be considered when you're doing redistricting were just violated by this map. Whoever drew this map up in Washington and sent it down here violated the basic principle, number one of which is maintaining communities of interest in concert with each other. They just threw that out of the window. The whole notion of not or minimizing the splitting of counties. One county split 4 different ways in order, as they did down in Tennessee with Memphis. This is tortious behavior that should not take place. If you want to draw districts along partisan political lines, that's one thing. But if you are fishing around to lump all of the black voters in one place, split them up, and you don't have a problem with a congressional district that's 75% white, that's an overrepresentation of white people in South Carolina. And so you've got these 75% white districts, and that's okay. And you draw a 45% African-American district, and that's not okay. There's something fundamentally wrong with that. And I spoke with some Democrats and Republicans who just feel that what they did up in Washington when they sent that map down here was just disrespectful. I think they only spoke 7 minutes and told them they would not answer any questions. You got state legislators here trying to maintain representation for their constituents, and you're going to just give them a map and not explain to them what the map is all about and refuse to answer their questions. What kind of respect is that? This, to me, was an attempt to make a foil out of the state Senate here in South Carolina, and they were not having any of it, irrespective of their political persuasions.
Quickly and finally here, just when you said that map from Washington, is your contention or your belief that this was essentially dictated from the Trump operation from the president to the politicians of South Carolina?
Absolutely. We heard about this map a week or so ago. Some members from South Carolina, from the legislature, went up to Washington and sat down with them, and they had a virtual discussion of the map that I understand from one state senator lasted for 7 minutes and 30 seconds. And then it was announced to them that they would not be answering any questions about it. Well, how disrespectful can you be? No, I don't quite understand why they would think any person would take that, at least more independent-minded South Carolinians. And that's, I think, is why those senators did what they did. Had nothing to do with anybody here. It was a disrespect that was visited upon them by those operatives in the White House.
That is a really fascinating, illuminating context, Congressman James Clyburn. Thank you so much for sharing that with us tonight. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for having me.